Good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me? Thank you so much. Thank you for honoring our time and being here early. If you can please indulge us for a few more minutes. We're waiting for some key guests to arrive. As soon as they do, in about 5 or so minutes, then we'll kick off our program. Thank you.
Located on the
Once again, a very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are about to start our program. May I please ask that we get comfortable? I hope we've all had a time to get some tea or coffee outside and are ready for what promises to be an insightful conversation. My name is Catherine Shipushu. I'm from the Namibia Investment Promotion and Development Board, and I have the honor of being the program director for this session. We'd like to welcome all of you to this session. Thank you special to Honorable Gwente Mantashe for honoring us with your presence this morning. We are very happy that you're joining us, sir. We've got a very short program, but very insightful, I believe. We're going to kick off with a presentation from Francois van Wyk, and then from there we go straight into our panel discussion. If you have any burning questions, I encourage you to jot them down, because after that we're going to kick off with a Q&A session where you can ask all your questions. So I'm sure you all know there's been quite a number of developments in the Namibian energy sector. Just earlier this week, we announced the third oil discovery in our country. And so the spotlight is really on Namibia. And with that, massive opportunities for our government and our people, but also for those who would like to do business with us. And therefore, the conversation this morning is also around what are the opportunities in Namibia for those of you who want to do business in our country? What are the opportunities for our country, and how can we leverage those to collaborate for the betterment of energy alleviation on the continent? I think on that note, can I just have a few house rules? Just one, actually. If you can please put your phones on silence. We want to make sure that the conversation is flowing and there are no disturbances. I know sometimes that one slips away. And then the restrooms are on this side. This is right, on the right-hand side. So please feel free to make use of those facilities. Before I call upon my colleague, Francois van Wyk, I would like to just ask the AV guys to play a short video. For those of you who may not be familiar with Namibia and our economic landscape, it's a good introduction to what we have to offer as a country. And then after that, Francois, may I please invite you up to give us your presentation. Can we have the video rolling, please? Thank you.
Located on the west coast of southern Africa, Namibia has a population of 2.5 million people, occupying 824,292 square kilometers of breathtaking landscapes, home to abundant wildlife. Since its independence in 1990, Namibia has proven to be an African reference due to its political and economic stability, sustained by a flourishing democracy. Over the past 30 years, the country has seen the peaceful transfer of power of 3 presidencies. Namibia is a land of hospitable people with rich cultural traditions and exciting investment opportunities. Through the world-class port at Walvis Bay, the country positions itself as a logistics hub for road, rail, and sea freight, connecting neighboring countries and the broader Southern Africa development community with the rest of the world. Namibia, in reinforcing its strategic position of a logistical hub, continues to invest in infrastructural projects to facilitate easy access and movement of people and goods throughout SADC countries with a population of more than 300 million people, and further access to the wider African market of 1 billion consumers through the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. The long-term economic and political strategy of growth is firmly based on ensuring openness to trade and external investment while advancing development of strategic key sectors of Namibia's economy: mining, fishing, agriculture, tourism, renewable energy. Namibia's vast renewable energy generation potential affords our generation with the opportunity to produce green hydrogen at unparalleled scales, thereby supporting our global objectives to decarbonize the planet. A prosperous and industrialized Namibia, developed by her human resources, enjoying peace, harmony, and political stability. Vision 2030. To achieve economic progression, social transformation, environmental sustainability, and good governance, the Namibian government is implementing the Harambee Prosperity Plan 2. HPP2 presents an opportunity to build on the legacy of the past 3 decades and guarantee a more secure future through resilient processes, systems, and institutions. The plan aims at implementing policy programs which enhance service delivery, private sector-led and inclusive economic growth. Namibia's diversification strategy is set to increase investment and development of the food industry, transport and logistics, metals, mining, renewable energy, chemicals and basic materials, digital and global business services, and machinery and electronics. With the vision of private sector-led growth, Namibia is open to trade and foreign direct investment and is continuously proving to be the preferred investment location in Africa. Among the reasons for this include protection of ownership rights and rule of law, sophisticated financial systems, trade agreements that facilitate regional, continental, and international market access, peace, and stability. A nation powered by nature and fueled by hope. A nation where our unity is our strength, where determination and passion endures. A nation powered by our unwavering belief in our values, our resources, and above all, our people. This is how we are shaping our future. Welcome to Namibia, the land of the brave.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. A special welcome to our guest of honor, Honorable Pantashe. Thank you very much for making time to be here. Without further ado, I'll really speak briefly about the energy sector and a brief summary, and we'll follow that up with a panel discussion in the various subsectors within energy from specialists that is joining us from government and private sector. Next. Okay. So I think we all know where Namibia is, and this is in particular aimed at sometimes our guests that maybe that are not that familiar with Africa. But Namibia at a glance, and I think this is the important page really of this whole presentation. As you can see, Namibia is a upper middle income country. We really focus on building our infrastructure, but also in particular the fact that, like we said in the video as well, it is a stable democracy, and of course the progression of this democracy is continuing. But the more important part, and the reason we're here this morning, is really around Namibia becoming the sustainable hub of Africa. Our president committed at Davos last year, or the year before rather, that Namibia will be the first carbon neutral country in Africa. And Dr. Haki Geingob, and we do believe, I think, with the best intentions, that we'll get there perhaps as early as 2040, where we invest heavily, of course, in renewables, but also use our resources in oil and gas as part of the energy transition. In terms of global rankings, just maybe to touch briefly on that. So in terms of environmental protection, Namibia is rated number 1 in projected greenhouse gas emissions, and again potentially reaching that particular objective earlier. But also where we look at green hydrogen production, and realize, I think we all realize that when we look at the wider scope of this particular environment, and especially against the background of the many unknown factors that are present in the green hydrogen space, that we will likely be one of the cheapest sites globally to actually produce green hydrogen. My colleague touched in her introduction briefly on oil and gas. We found there were subsequent fines by Shell that was announced on Friday last week, And I think to this extent, we're very excited by this find. But of course, it's a optimistic but a careful optimism. We realize that significant work still needs to go into validating the find and, of course, the extent of it. So when you look at the legislative framework and policies, and I'll just touch on one or two of these. Our renewable policy is really based on and focused on 70% renewable energy penetration by 2030. And that obviously will make a significant impact also on our reliance for base load, but in particular with the view of using gas to generate base load in the near future. The modified single buyer framework, which was introduced in 2019, or rather revised in 2019, and we'll touch on that in the panel discussion in more depth and detail as well, specifically speaks to the liberalization of the energy market in not only in Namibia but in sub-Saharan Africa, and how we now continue to trade really cross-border, not only with our immediate neighbor South Africa, from who we are an energy importer, but also from other countries in the region. And so if we look at this together with the future of synthetic fuels, green hydrogen, and oil and gas, we believe that our energy mix will predominantly be green by 2040. So in terms of oil and gas opportunities, I spoke about that earlier. So we know that Shell made the latest announcement earlier this week, but also I think the find by Total and their partners. We know that the Qatari petroleum company is also involved in Namibia, and then of course the national oil company Namco is also a shareholder in these undertakings. But in terms of the actual deposits, so Wood Mackenzie reckons about 6 billion barrels of oil. Of course, it's a guess, an educated guess at this stage. But yes, we do look forward to making further announcements by Q3 of this year. I think we've touched on the oil reserve, so I'm not going to say anything further about that. But I think the point really is around our comparative advantage in the green hydrogen value chain. And so in terms of local production and the localization of production, we are really confident that we'll be able to produce hydrogen between 25 and 33 Namibia dollar, and for the South Africans in the room, that's about that's the same as rand, between 25 and 33 rand per kilogram. That's basically sub $2. To make it clear, and even lower than that against current exchange rates. And we're quite confident, alongside Chile, possibly, we'll be one of the cheapest locations to produce green hydrogen. I'm also very happy to welcome the representatives from Hyphen Hydrogen Energy in the room. They also, as you know, they are the preferred bidder for the SCDI project that was tendered for, and they were appointed as the preferred bidder. And so we look forward. I think we're all looking forward to us concluding government's negotiations with them and to conclude a contract and for them to start their project. To that effect, I think it was a learning curve, or certainly is still a learning curve for all of us. So in a way, and maybe to preempt some of the questions that might come from the audience, we do understand that Namibia, like many other jurisdictions, including South Africa, there is a gap in policy in terms of this particular industry. And I don't think it's because of government not being able or willing to fill that gap, but it's a question of this is really a nascent industry, brand new for everyone, and we're all learning as we go along from each other, the South learning from the North and the other way around as well. But in terms of the hydrogen project in particular, or the Hyphen project in particular, so we're expecting the project to kick off by 2026. And it'll start off with 5 gigawatts of renewables and 3 gigawatts of electrolysis. And so we're expecting about 300,000 tons of green hydrogen to be produced and exported. Then I think maybe in conclusion of the green hydrogen aspect of it, we're fully expecting other green hydrogen valleys to emerge over time as well. And so when we look at our comparative advantage, in particular in terms of price, and of course, like I said before, we're aiming for sub $2 per kilogram. We're certainly in a space now where the other competitor countries catching up with us. And of course, South Africa would be one of them. And like we said yesterday at another event, that partnership is actually quite important and central to what we do in the region. So in terms of the world-class solar and wind resources, we fully expect actually that a number of other mega-sized projects will emerge over time. And that energy could be used to either generate green hydrogen or supply the grid, or also supply green industries. And because we know that, and if you look at the top line, there, then I think that really speaks to the core of the matter, and it is really around the high DNI, and in the second paragraph, the high and constant wind speeds that we see, in particular on the south coast of Namibia. So in terms of regional cohesion, and I touched on that earlier, so by reducing South Africa's emissions profile and also alleviating the strain on Eskom and the SABP to supply power to its neighbors. So Namibia, of course, being currently a net importer of electricity, we're also working towards our own energy independence and being able to work with and serve our neighbors in the region. So in terms of carbon market opportunities, again, I'm not going to speak about that at length. Mr. Benedict Labanda, the CEO of the EIF, the Environment Investment Fund in Namibia, will be joining us on the panel later, and he will speak about the emissions trading system that Namibia is currently exploring and hoping to roll out. So why Namibia? And I think this is really the key for most energy investors. Well, aside from the abundant natural resources, and we spoke about the wind and the solar quality and resources, but also in terms of market access, Namibia is a member of the SABP, the Southern African Power Pool, and we already actually through IPPs export energy into the region. But at the same time, we offer substantial investor protections, both in our constitution, but also subsequent legislation. And in terms of investment and profit repatriation, I think we're really leading in that area in comparison to many other jurisdictions on the continent. And of course, in terms of infrastructure, logistics, and in particular human rights and political stability, we are a leader on the continent. I think we're very proud to say that freedom of speech is part of the key human rights that we value. And of course, we see really across the continent where maybe it's not the same, and we don't have that freedom to express ourselves. I think what is quite important maybe to mention in conclusion is really around market access. So yes, of course, through SABP we can and we do export energy, and will be exporting energy, but also importing energy like we are doing from South Africa at the moment. But at the same time, producing green products, but also as energy forming part of our industrialization strategy, the ability to export products rather into the continent through the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, but also the European Partnership Agreement, AGOA, and Mercosur. So Namibia is one of the few countries that can export selected agricultural products to both, to all the major trading blocs, namely China, Europe, and the European Union and the US. And I think from that perspective, of course, processing not only agricultural products, but also, of course, mining products in terms of metals and minerals becomes very important. Namibia also plays a leading role in EV battery manufacturing, and I think when we look at the raw materials, the critical raw materials that is required for these batteries, we've become really a hotspot for that. So part of our ambitions really is to process these metals and minerals domestically before either that's exported or these batteries are manufactured locally. Ladies and gentlemen, maybe in conclusion, so the NIPDB, or the Namibia Investment Promotion and Development Board, is a public entity in the Office of the President, and our key function really is to facilitate investments into Namibia. So please feel free, if you have further questions as to how to come to Namibia after this session, to speak to either me, myself, Catherine, or any of our other colleagues that are in the room. But without further ado, I would like to introduce our panel this morning. And if I could ask you to make your way when I call your name. Mr. Carlo McLeod, he's a director at the Ministry of Mines and Energy. Frans Kalenga is a senior manager at NAMCOR. Kandali Yambu. Where is Kandali Yambu? She's the director, or the executive rather, for markets. Mr. Phineas Matota, he's the acting CEO of the Electricity Control Board. Mr. Benedict Lebanda, he's the CEO of the Environmental Investment Fund. And Fabian Schnika, he's the lead mining and energy director at Rand Merchant Bank Namibia. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. I'm going to make my way over. Can I have a mic, please? I'm going to make my way over, and perhaps by way of introduction, I'll ask my colleagues to really, on the back of our presentations earlier this year, both at the Energy Week but also the Mining Indaba, I think we kind of sketched very clearly what our ambitions are in terms of not only the energy space but also in industrialization kind of generally. And I think what is very important for us is to maybe give you, as the investing public, an update as to where we are. So I don't know, Carlo, maybe we can start with you. So in your space, which is predominantly the policy space, what are the kind of the new interactions we should be considering as the investing public, or as a potential investor? What is important now, and what should we be kind of considering?
Sure. Hello. Thank you, Francois. Good morning, all. My name is Carlo McLeod. I'm from the Ministry of Mines and Energy. This is exciting times for Namibia. As you all know, that meaningful discoveries have been made. And from the government's point of view, we are kind of working on trying to find ways on how to, see to it that these resources that has been discovered somehow meaningfully contribute to the lives of the Namibians, as well as seeing how we sustainably can contribute towards the socio-economic benefits of the country. In that way, to ensure that that takes place, Namibia has looked at a number of interventions, one being, most importantly, a local content policy that is currently in its draft form. The policy has been drafted to meaningfully address the issues of managing the expectations of Namibians, and there is an obligation spelled out in the policy that the companies, the oil companies that are involved and in our production processes, are basically investing in certain areas, especially value creation, creating skills, knowledge transfer, ownership, as well as, creating industries or help setting up industries in order to meaningfully contribute to the economy. The idea is for Namibia not to just depend on taxes and royalties, but however gain more value from backwards, forward, and sideways linkages. And that is why this local content policy is important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carlo. Frans, if we can move to you next. So you were you were a member of the green hydrogen technical team. You also advised and still advises the Minister of Mines and Energy on green hydrogen in particular. And you're currently at NAMCOR, where NAMCOR is also obviously considering their proposition in this space. Where are we now as a country, and kind of what is next from your point of view?
Thank you, Franza. Good morning, everyone, and good morning to those that are following us online. Evening, afternoon, depends where you find yourself. My name is Franz Kalenga, as earlier introduced. I'm the Senior Manager for Sustainable Energies at NAMCO and a Special Technical Advisor to the Minister of Mines and Energy Namibia on green hydrogen. That's a very good question, and I'm so glad that we're able to provide feedback to the audience since our last engagement at COP 27. So currently, in terms of a country, we have about 6 projects that are in country, both government and private sector led, and they are all at different stages. I'll start with the Hyphen project. Just that you earlier alluded, they are the preferred bidder after a very transparent proposal that they've the tender process. And since then up to now, we are about to conclude the implementation agreement that we are going to sign with them so that the feasibility studies can commence. And roughly would like to believe by the second quarter of the year, we should have finalized even that feasibility to start kicking in. Now, I could go on and on what are the benefits or how does the project profile look like, but for now, let me just give that an update. And then the other project, which is private sector led, is called the HDF within the Swakopmund, where they are looking at producing power from hydrogen. The project is also in the advanced stage. They are looking at getting an offtake, like a power purchasing agreement, and also the generation license. Then that makes it 2. So the other 4 projects, if you may recall very well, that as government we set a strategy that with the decarbonization, what do we really want to do, and what do we want to demonstrate as a country? We realize that the hydrogen ambitions are for really the hard-to-abate sector. Therefore, through our strong partnership, when we managed to get the 40 million euros, we managed to secure 30 million euros to fund the pilot project. So these pilot projects, there are 4. One, we were looking at decarbonizing the port sector, the marine sector. That project is currently going through the pre-contractual agreement. And then we have the dual fuel, where we are looking at retrofitting Trans-Namib trains and to run on hydrogen. That project is still under negotiations. We are yet to conclude before we can start with the pre-contractual. And then we have another project on refueling station with the clean energy. So clean energy is a combination of our ONL, it's a private sector that had a beer arm, and they sold their beer arm to enter into renewable. They partnered up with CMB Tech, which is a Belgian company, in order to test the viability of hydrogen fuel from a refueling point of view. That project, it's pending environmental impact assessment, but they are groundbreaking, speaking under correction, this month also. And then leaves us with the last project, which is the Daures Green Hydrogen Valley. where they are looking at testing the viability of hydrogen being converted to ammonia through the processes, so that we can test how will this fertilizer be able to work for us for agricultural and also just production of hydrogen. Now, these projects, what they have in common is that we have the refueling station where the hydrogen will be produced and must feed into all this other, so we can test the viability of what hydrogen can really do. So what is next? In terms of legal framework, we are looking at setting up an implementation office that is moving at a high speed, so that we come up with an environment that is conducive, that gives comfort to investor, because currently, as it stands, there's no legal framework for the Synthetic Fuels Act. I'm sure I'll be able to go into details about that. And we are just looking forward to also the hyphen project, because that is a key to unlocking the other land parcels that we have. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Please do. Thank you. Kandali Yambo, thank you for joining us. Kandali is like I mentioned earlier, the executive for actually the Modified Single Buyer Office at NamPower. Kandali, so aside from the MSB, like I mentioned, we know that from a generation point of view, NamPower is also continuing to invest in generation projects, but also at the same time looking at strengthening the grid. You know, along from what I said earlier around you know, grid connections with our neighbors and et cetera, et cetera. Is there an immediate update we can communicate, and in particular around the availability of baseload, and perhaps a quick update on energy imports, what NamPower's immediate plans are around that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Francois, for that question. As Francois said, I'm Kandali Yambo, an executive from NamPower. NamPower being a national power utility of Namibia. As alluded earlier by Francois, that Namibia is a net importer. We import most of our energy or power from neighboring countries within the SADC region. So our import levels, they actually vary depending on how Ruacana, which is our hydro plant, actually operates. So it varies from 60 or 50 to 60, or sometimes up to 70, as we know that the region has been hit with drought for the past few years. So we import from Zambia about 180 megawatts. We also import from Zimbabwe about 80 megawatts, and also from South Africa 100 megawatts. And we're talking about the firm, what we import as firm. And of course, we have a dream as Namibia to be self-sufficient. And but then also the fact that we are interconnected, and SADC, we are interconnected with other utilities, is basically to provide such support to each other. And this is actually the dream that was established obviously through the SADC protocols that we have set up in the region. So we started as NamPower. We actually, knowing that Namibia has a lot of renewable or wind and solar, so we have started with our first project way 10 years ago, being one of the first utilities within SADC to basically venture into renewable energy. So up to now we have 160 megawatts which is online. That is including what the IPPs and plants that are owned by NamPower, and also the fact that the market is also open. We are also the regional distributors are also contracting directly with the IPPs to basically set up their own plant, and that is also included in the 160 megawatts. So we also having our 214 of combination of wind and solar, which is in the pipeline. which is anticipated to be commissioned by 2025, 2026. So with that, we're also looking into, of course, we know that the system or the grid will not operate optimally only with renewables. We know the challenges that renewable energy brings along, such as intermittency, and we know that it's not a constant supply. So we're also looking into how we will actually be able to provide supply uninterruptibly to our customers and also to our neighboring countries. And this we can achieve this by obviously introducing and implementing the baseload power plants. As we know that the world has moved away from funding fossil fuels projects, they more are aligned to fund renewable projects, but we also know that we will not be able to run our system, and when I say our system is the Southern African Power Pool system, solely on renewables. So the fact that we have certain countries in the northern part that are blessed with hydropower plants, and then on the southern part of SADC blessed with a fossil fuel such as coal and gas. So, and Namibia and other countries also are actually blessed with renewable, which is wind and solar. So the region will be able to work together closely to basically complement the supply. And that is the reason why the region has implemented and is continuing to implement into interconnectors. And that is to assist each other during the times that when the other utility is actually in need of power. So it is set up in such a way that, and we continue to do a harmonized planning as the region, set up in a way that we complement, or utilities complement the supply of other utilities in depending at the time of the year, whether it's the hydro during the rainy season, then supports the countries with renewable or with fossil fuel plants. So basically, even Namibia in itself, we're looking at a number of projects in terms of baseload supply, which are IPPs and obviously some that will be owned by the state. And we're looking at projects such as Kudu, looking at projects, basically there are so many projects, HFO and then gas powered power plants. Maybe let me end there for now.
Thank you, Kandari. Next up, Mr. Matota, Phineas. Phineas is the acting CEO of the Electricity Control Board. There's also a number of changes from a regulatory point of view coming down the line, including actually to the board itself. And so maybe if you can briefly talk about that.
Honorable Minister, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Yeah, as you know, the regulator is basically an implementer of government policies. So government normally set policies, and then of course the regulator will then have to implement. When we're speaking of the policies, we have the energy policy, IPP policy, the Harambee Prosperity Policy. One of the outcomes of the Harambee Prosperity Plan, which is HPP1, was actually to sort of reform the electricity market sector. The intention or the outlook was that how do we then reform the electricity market sector so that we make it competitive and also for private sector to participate. Hence, then we moved into the board then was responsible to ensure that that reform happens. And then we came up with what we call the modified single buyer. The modified single buyer, the intention is to allow certain customers, which we can call contestable, to buy electricity from IPPs. So what happened there is that NamPower was not only the supplier of electricity as in a single buyer market model. So it opened up the market so that mines, large power users can contract not only embedded, but with an IPP anywhere in the country in terms of buying electricity. So with that, it also then brought the fact that we needed to come up with market rules, We've come up with what we call the modified single buyer market rules in terms of how the trading is going to take place, because these are bilateral trading, wheeling framework, and also a balancing framework. If you are then selling to a customer that is in the northern part of the country and your IPP is probably in the southern part of the country, how do we deal with those issues? So from a regulator point of view, on the electricity sector side, we do have the necessary legislations, we do have the necessary rules, and not only does it address the issue internally, we also then allow government from the onset said, in as much as we are importing, our market is very small, but we have vast resources. How do we then also allow the other neighboring countries to benefit? So export of electricity was allowed from the get-go, and that's why you've seen that Francois showed that we have issued the license of 125 megawatt for export purposes. This has actually increased to about 300 now. So the idea there is that we want the neighboring countries also to benefit. So now the issue, what we have also seen is that now the Electricity Control Board issued the license. What are the responsibility of the other role players, the financiers? Because in the past we were used to these long-term power purchase agreements where the government is underwriting these agreements. But the market is there. Why do we need the long-term power purchase agreements? The financial institutions, whether private or FDIs, I think there is an opportunity for them to come in to sort of assist us. Not only Namibia, but all the region. South Africa has a situation, Zambia has a situation. We are sitting with a deficit, and in most cases, you are being asked who's underwriting the PPA. If we can perhaps move in a direction where we can embrace these merchant plants and be able then to trade, and it doesn't mean that the power station needs to be Namibia or South Africa. As long as we are connected, let us upgrade the transmission network so that we can trade this electricity more easily. So moving into where we are moving, for instance, now with the development of green hydrogen. Green hydrogen, you produce it using electricity. The legislation in electricity is there. So as Frans have indicated, the gap is more on the generation or the production of green hydrogen and other synthetic fuel sources. So that is where the collaboration is needed. In terms of electricity generation, I think those are things that both, or not only in Namibia and South Africa, but in the region, those are things that we have done. And I think we just need to collaborate more so that we can get more out of the resource that we are having at a much cheaper rate. Our region might not be in a position to consume all the green hydrogen that we are talking about, but our region will be able to consume the electricity that we are having. Francois, let me end there for now.
Thank you, Phineas. Benedict, so you're wearing two hats, really, in a way. So as the CEO of the EIF, you look at green projects on a continuous basis, and clearly the funding of these projects, including, I'm sure, electricity projects, are very important part of your portfolio. The other side of it is, of course, the EIF is taking a lead and also a guiding light, in a sense, in terms of carbon trading. Do you want to kind of update us where you are on both of those, and then we can circle back to you later with some more questions?
Thank you very much, Francois, and good morning to all. Actually, one of the challenges that we're facing is that at the backdrop of constrained financial, fiscal space, how do you participate in these huge investment opportunities as government? So one of the innovation that we've unlocked is to design what we call the SDG Namibia 1, which is a blended financing and investment platform that might address some of the needs, financial needs on the market. Basically, it's aimed to crowd in different types of capital, mainly concessional capital, high concessional capital, and use that to de-risk the investment, private sector investments. So we're working with a variety of different financiers, international development banks, multilateral finance institution, etc. So what this platform does is that we target to raise about 1 billion euros by end of this financial year under the SDG Namibia 1, and that will be used towards investment in green hydrogen assets and value chains, as well as activating government equity participation in some of the projects. When we look at these figures, this is likely to be one of the biggest hydrogen fund at national level in the world, not only in Africa. So, and that does not include leverage or capital recycling, which can increase by threefold in terms of investment over a long term. The strategy is that under the SDG number 1, we have developed a development fund that will support early stage and project preparation. Once projects are prepared and advanced to bankability, then they move to the construction equity fund, and then from the construction equity fund, they also have the operational fund, which is very, very low risk and fixed income guarantee fund, which is palatable to pension funds, commercial banks, etc. And that is how we've structured the SDG number 1, and we hope by the 1st of July this year, SDG number 1 will be fully operating the development fund to start advancing grants for project preparation in the country. And we have already capitalized the development fund with 40 million euros that we received from the Invest International. So we have further fundraising for 60 million euros, so that the development fund is 100 million euros in terms of advancing projects support for early stage investments. The construction equity fund, we've got a 500 million euro offer from the European Investment Bank, and that letter of intent was signed by our president last year at COP. And this month or next month, we are undertaking a due diligence with the European Investment Bank and see how we can finally unlock that 500 million euros. We're talking to Mizuho Bank. I see that here in the building. Next month we'll be in Japan, speaking to them on their interest to participate on this blended financing platform. On top of those three funds, we've also looked at carbon credit. We believe that carbon credits, carbon market specifically, has got the potential to promote green technologies, specifically linking it to green hydrogen production. If we take the case of Hyphen project only, at its full capacity of 300 tons of green hydrogen per annum, that has got the potential to displace about 6 to 7 million tons of carbon emissions per annum. So that's really a source of good revenue in terms of trading it on the international platform. And how do we do that? We have to use the framework in the Paris Agreement. That is Article 2 of the Paris Agreement. There is the cooperative approach that provides a framework for transfer of mitigation outcomes between two participating countries, and such proceeds should be ring-fenced towards the nationally determined contribution investments or the SDG investments. And there's also another framework that is in place at international level called the ITMOS, the International Transfer of Mitigation Outcomes, that could be triggered between two participating countries to harvest those carbon credits benefits the Namibian population. So what we're doing at the national level in terms of framework is we are at a final design of the carbon market policy and framework, which will be hosted within the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Tourism. There will be a carbon market office there as from August this year. It will be responsible for the registry of all renewable energy assets that wish to participate on these international trading platforms. And in the meantime, we have joined the Climate Market Club, which is a club of different governments and entities that are aspiring towards promoting carbon trading and associated activities. We've also looked at partnering with the South Pole in the north, is based in Netherlands, where we are doing market sounding for carbon off-takers at the European Emission Trading Scheme. And these are the kind of activities that we've undertaken. I will not give the figures in terms of how much we can generate from carbon trading, but it's a substantial figure, I have to say. I'll stop there, Francois.
Thank you, Benedict. Last but certainly not the least, Fabian Chinika from RMB Namibia. Fabian, clearly RMB Namibia is really taking the lead in energy investment, decarbonization, funding. What does your pipeline look like? Where do you focus? What is the sweet spot? And from your view, we know that South Africa and Namibia has both countries have a significant pension fund or pension fund assets available. Does that make a difference in this space at all? And especially from a bank like yours, what is the how can I put it? What is the expectation even domestic or international investors could have to have local support from local banks?
Yeah. Good morning, everyone, and thanks a lot, Francois. I think quite a loaded question, actually, so I'll try and break it down. I'll probably just start by, typically when you sit in this sort of type of sessions, the definition around what is, climate financing is fairly loosely defined. So it's quite important, I think, for me to articulate how we view that, and then I'll sort of move on to that. I think the first one really is, for us, climate financing is any financing that goes towards helping the transition that ultimately leads to us building a climate resilient economy. It's really important to have that as the departing point. It's anything that goes towards that. So that's sort of what we see. How do we do that? Again, the various ways to do that, and I actually want to break this up into two parts. I explained sort of the what. It's towards a climate resilient economy. The how, there's two ways to do this, really broadly speaking. The one bucket is really you want to mitigate. You want to mitigate the climate effects. The other bucket is you want to adapt. Now, the mitigation aspect of it is really, I think, where this discussion largely falls in. Under mitigation, you really have, focusing on carbon zero initiatives. Typically, your solar plants and all of that will be carbon zero initiatives. But there's also very important, and I'm latching on to some of the discussions that we had yesterday, around transitioning. So it's not necessarily carbon zero, it's not near carbon zero, but it helps us transition into a low carbon domain. That's very important, and that's under the mitigation. On the adaptation side, it's really around, somebody mentioned the word, the environmental impacts. It's very getting extreme. So there's certain initiatives that as a bank we look at. It doesn't have to do anything with carbon targets. It's all about building a resilient economy. And for me, why that is important, RMB as a bank, we're largely an African bank, but we've got footprint across the globe, the Americas, India, but we're largely an African bank. But why that differentiation about the buckets is important is our approach is really depending on which jurisdiction you operate in, we then adopt accordingly. So typically in the Namibian space, a greater amount of our funding has and will be probably focused on the bucket around mitigation. My colleagues have spoken about, our intention to have all the green hydrogen projects, all the solar plants that we're doing. So that speaks largely to that. But it's very important to highlight that there is a component around mitigation. And we shouldn't forget why we're doing all these things. Ultimately, it is to make the planet climate resilient. So in terms of funding, we're looking at both buckets. Bulk of it has been concentrating on bucket, what I call bucket one, which is in the mitigation. But it's definitely, we really have got appetite for both sides. Now, to come to Namibia very specifically, I think, what does the pipeline look like? You've asked that. I think we've been very, very busy in Namibia. I think the last 12 months has been very exciting times for us. But more importantly, I think we've been fostering partnerships. And this is why I'm here. You could tell from the panel that's on here, I think we've got the ingredients to make this all work. I mean, Benedict is sitting right here. He's probably playing in the space that typically for commercial banks, you don't want to extend debt into that space because we think it's maybe risky. But it's so important that we collaborate and that we work together and make sure that, the projects that we cannot handle are handled by our partners. So I think to summarize, really, I'm not going to go into detail on the actual projects that we're doing, but both on the mitigation part, which is largely our focus, but as well as on the adaptation space. There is a lot of projects, typically the projects that were mentioned earlier on the green hydrogen, they fit in both of those buckets. Lots of work going on, but our focus is really on making sure that we form the right partnerships.
Thank you very much. And maybe if I can actually start with you in terms of a couple of follow-up questions. You touched on the two buckets, as you call them. And so certainly from an industrialization point of view, funding is, or low carbon industrialization point of view, funding is important, commercial funding is important. Because clearly not all projects will qualify for grants and similar funds. So I suppose my question is, commercial banks generally, and of course your context is RMB, but commercial banks generally, what are the type of projects you are currently considering? I think is the first question for me. And I think the second one really closely connected to that is, so in terms of competitive advantage, what advantage do we have by pushing forward the ESG and SDG kind of compliance agenda? So how does that put us forward in terms of, the cost of funding, cost of capital, and how does that help the private sector to grow?
Okay, thanks, Francois. I think let me start with your very first one on the type of projects. I think naturally, if you look at Namibia, it lends itself to all the projects that we mentioned before. So we've participated in the precursor to the modified single buyer project or program. I think some of my clients are actually sitting in here, and some of them also then are now active in looking at the SAPP pool. Again, without going into detail, that is really a large focus area of ours. But I think that's almost the things that we've been working with. The landscape's changing very quickly. While we're in Cape Town, the major younger oil discovery was made. So we have to remain contemporary. So I see a lot of our pipeline also having a lot of focus on the oil and gas side of the energy part. Of course, the green hydrogen, we are involved at early stage with the various players in that. So I think in summary, really, again, it's almost repeating my earlier point. It's a large portion to bucket one, which is mitigating, but maybe to a smaller extent, we are looking at the mitigating parts. And then in terms of, I think you asked the ESG, I think the way to look at it, Franco, my view is it's almost, you shouldn't use ESG as a competitive, and I do see the minister maybe wants to make use of this time to, okay. You shouldn't use, yeah, I can. Yeah, he wants to.
Thank you again to Honourable Mantashe for joining us this morning. Like he said, unfortunately, he needs to leave for his cabinet committee meeting. So, business of state always calls. Fabian, sorry to interrupt you. So maybe if you want to kind of complete that thought.
Yes. So I was just touching on the ESG part of your question. I think two parts to it. The first one, my view, is that essentially we shouldn't use ESG almost in the same context as, looking for a competitive advantage. I think when the approach is as such, it's not going to be sustainable. And secondly, I just think it's you're losing the why. Why are we doing this? So ESG necessarily shouldn't be that lever that you should look at it. How can we be competitive? But in the Namibian case, if you were to take that approach, I think in terms of a typical measure that we look at is the nationally defined commitments by different countries, and Namibia has actually put out a very ambitious target out there. I think it's to decrease carbon emitting gases or green hydrogen emitting or carbon emitting gases by 89%. I think by 2030. Very ambitious, but I think all the projects that we've got in the pipeline, it's very possible. But what that means is there's certain sectors, and Mutota has spoken about it, that we can use to really decarbonize our transport, our mining sectors, our agri sectors. So that will really help us. But I think that the key point really to take away here is for us to remember why we're on this journey. And not necessarily use ESG to gain an advantage. It's a business imperative. You have to tick all the boxes, not to gain advantage, but because it's the right thing to do if you do want to achieve the target of building a climate resilient economy.
Thank you very much. I've been given signals here that we're running out of time. So I would like to maybe ask one or two final questions from some panelists, but definitely leave some time for questions from the audience. We have a number of people in the audience here wanting to know, in particular, about green hydrogen and how the sector is unfolding. And fiscal regime plays a key role really to industrial development. What is the progress on that? And is there maybe some initial details that you're able to share with us, Frans?
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Francois. In terms of fiscal regimes within the green hydrogen space or industry, currently it's just like Benedict had alluded on the SDG Namibia one. We consider that one also as a fiscal regime because it provides government an opportunity to take equity in some of these green hydrogen projects. But in terms of what will be the corporate tax, what will be the royalty, what incentives that will be there. All this is left for the birth of the Synthetic Fuels Act. Once we have that act, the act will be informed by all these studies that we are doing, the competitive advantage also with other jurisdiction. And as you've heard again, Benedict have mentioned the availability of funds that is already available to set up that implementation office, availability of funds so that the process of the Synthetic Fuels Act starts already. Stakeholder engagement have already commenced. So at the end of, I would like to believe, quarter 2 of this year, we'll be able to have a direction of how typical the Synthetic Fuels Act will look like and what are the physical regimes so that we can be able to communicate that to the investor. However, that still doesn't stop us from proceeding with the current projects. That's just one of the components. Mtota has mentioned that the green hydrogen value chain is huge. We have the legal frameworks or instruments existing, except that they are just in isolation. We need to consolidate it so that it becomes one law for that industry. Most of these projects that will require generation, we have a generation license that you get from ECB. If it's about transporting of dangerous goods and all those things, we have the law with Ministry of Works and Transport. So storage but the short answer is we are working on the physical regimes currently, and we have the means already to be able to kickstart the process, which have already started. But from your presentation, you've demonstrated how stable of a country Namibia is, and all the many reasons that encourages investment in the country, regardless of us not having a concrete fiscal regime, because business can still continue as usual. And I wanted to touch on the last point on one of the points of the carbon market. That is one that is already in place, the policy and framework that really is going to look at, as a company, for example, NAMCO, a lot of people are looking at it as a threat that we are discovering oil, and at the same time we are doing green hydrogen. But there shouldn't be a competition. They should be complementary. We are able to know that the profits that comes from the oil will help us to accelerate the green hydrogen industry, and we know that because of the carbon that is emitted through the production of this oil will give us that competitive advantage for us to enhance and strengthen the carbon credit market. The green hydrogen can be used to add value to the oil, so that as ridiculous it sounds, we can have a green oil field, you know. So that is just to give. So Synthetic Fuels Act in the pipeline, fiscal regimes are being considered. What are the tax incentives that we can give to the investor so that we encourage more investment? I think, let me stop there.
Thank you very much. Maybe to conclude, before we go to our audience, Karua, in terms of the local content policy, and I kind of want to touch on skills as well, because, you know, in my office where I work, this is the questions we get asked. And also with the overlap with the development of the green hydrogen industry, what does the ministry see in terms of skills, but is in particular developing local industry, domestic industry for both upstream and downstream, and how can we support these two emerging industries?
Thank you, Francois. I think the development of skills goes long before the local content policy was even a subject. Currently in the petroleum agreement as well as in the Act, there are obligations as provided for that the license holders should contribute a certain amount of training funds to the Petro Fund, which 70% goes out to training the nation, Namibians, and 30% is being utilized to train in-house, that is now MME, as well as the company's personnel. And these funds are basically primarily used for skills upliftment, to transfer knowledge to Namibians. And this has been going on for some years. We have a lot of Namibians, I think myself as well as Franz, are beneficiaries of this particular process of upskilling through going to universities in the UK, getting your master's degree programs, and so on and so on. This is a process that has been ongoing. And to just add to that, the local content policy just amplifies, the need for further skills transfer and knowledge and capacity building. So yes, we are very deliberate in doing this. It is an industry that we now somehow want to see progressing, and we want to also learn at the same time from others within the region, like Nigeria, like Angola, Ghana, and so on, how they've been doing it, so that we can also not make ourselves, guilty of falling into pitfalls that others have, when it comes to not having the necessary skills and capacity to do so. And I think this is very important because sometimes when investors come into the country, they would always use, the opportunity to say that, okay, we are bringing in our own skills because the country don't have, the capacity to do so. I think this is something that we, as a country, would not take lightly. We have been very deliberate on skills transfer. We want to see that Namibians take up all positions as well as meaningfully contribute also in the sector. Thank you.
Great, thank you. No, and I know the ministry is also strategically busy developing particular programs to upskill Namibians to be ready for these industries. Franz, you indicated you wanted to say one last thing.
Yes, just on the basis of what Carlo said, and
Yes.
that's exactly what we have done also with the green hydrogen. We want to prepare ourselves so that we don't get to be told that you don't have the skills, you don't have the expertise. So currently, I would like to believe that Namibia is the only country in the world that have issued out scholarships on green hydrogen. And those scholarships this month, the minister from Germany is coming for them to award those scholarships for these students to go and train in Germany. Some of them are being trained in Namibia with UNAM or NAS, so that we are fully equipped and prepared for the industry. So I just wanted to comment on the capacity building.
So UNAM is the University of Namibia, and NAS is the Namibia University of Science and Technology, for colleagues that don't know. So I believe we have a roaming mic somewhere. Catherine, and I believe there are questions. Sir?
Thank you, Francois. It's good to see some colleagues we've interacted with via Teams from NamPower, from EIF, from RMB. I fully agree. Mine is more of a comment. Fully agree with the concept of Namibia being the sustainable energy hub of Africa, particularly when it comes to power. What Namibia has done is quite revolutionary and may not be fully appreciated in setting up a regulatory environment which is conducive to the mobilization of capital in the form of cost-reflective tariffs, the modified single buyer market, which is really significant in opening up the SAP market, prepaid collection, and having one of the few highly credit-rated utilities still in the region. And that's why we picked Namibia to partner with a local entrepreneur and set up a SPAC a couple of years ago, which bought the largest solar EPC in Namibia and has bought a couple of IPPs in the form of ANIREP. And this is consistent with our 20-year vision, which we presented to the SADC Energy Ministers Forum in 2009, which was adopted at the time. And that would have set the path to avoid the power shortages we're experiencing today. And it was essentially adopted by the SADC Energy Ministers Forum, but sadly it needed to be endorsed by the SADC heads of state, and it wasn't, and hence we are in the situation we're in. And essentially it's around using what is a wonderful tool in SADC, which is the SAP market, with a fully electronic trading system, which is based in Harare, which has got a network which sees what's happening in each of the networks. And if one can put capital behind that concept and take away the biggest hurdle in my mind to the mobilization of capital in the power sector, which is this concept of PPAs. And in assisting to set up ANIREP, what we're really looking at doing is mobilizing capital to be able to tap into setting up power projects to capitalize on the ability to trade power in the region. And we therefore remain very excited about what Namibia has done. And I think it's really revolutionary and may not be appreciated, because what Namibia has done, the regulatory environment, it's opened up, it's set the path that the region needs to follow in opening up the market, because ultimately that's the only way to go, is to open up the market, allow import, export, look at the least cost source of generation and put capital behind that. Thank you.
Thank you thank you very much. Actually, great comments, and I think we certainly totally agree. I do know, and maybe actually let's take your question first, and then I can go to the panel.
Morning, Francois. So my name is Alistair Aspara. So I'm an MD of a local EPC, Namibian EPC called Protecton. So my question is as follows. I see an asymmetrical distribution of risk when it comes to project implementation. So I represent the companies, because we do have subcontractors that create the real tangible value when it comes to projects. So yes, we partner up with foreign IPPs, we might be contracted, or with foreign EPCs, but the fact is you still need people on the ground to do the work. My question is, how do we protect those at the end of the value chain to make our industry more sustainable? So we obviously are affected by the international commodity markets, and we see high risk in the area of EPC. So just to simplify my question, when it comes to companies that have the requisite skills that are required, not those that need to upskill themselves, but that have a bit of experience and that effectively contribute, how do we protect the Namibian EPC, local EPC that actively participates in these projects?
I love it how Benedict is avoiding eye contact. Do you want to, do you want to try that one, or maybe Fabian?
Okay, I can give it a try, Francois. But you know, in the context of green hydrogen, maybe also in the discussions that we're having with our partners at Hyphen, one of the discussions we're having is local procurement of works and jobs, especially targeting entities that are Namibian. I think we've touched on a figure, if I'm not mistaken, about 30% of procurement to be reserved for the local industries, including financial markets, including technical offerings. I think in the concept of green hydrogen, you know, there is space and willingness from our partners to promote that and also transfer skills to domestic entities. What we're encouraging is partnerships for local entities to partner with well-established international entities and see how they can leverage more on participation. My colleague Kalenga will have some to add on that, since he has been also on the negotiating team of
Please, Kalenga.
green hydrogen.
Yes, very good question, Alistair. I'm sure it's the government with the green. I'm going to be more on the green hydrogen. We have seen that precedents have been set on the enforcement where they are not enforced, but it's in black and white, and I see that's where you are coming from. So what we have done, especially with the green hydrogen, especially even when we are doing the negotiations, there are, how do I call them? There are teams that are set up on, as we call it, social economic,
ECD.
yeah,
Socio-economic development.
yes, socioeconomic development, that's looking really to make sure that with the project, let's say for example, the hyphen project, how are we going to make sure that they are going to do what they said they are going to do? So there is literally a committee there where there is a chair, the vice chair, in terms of how they are informing the decision and then informing the overall negotiation team that hyphen has produced 1,500 or 15,000 jobs. How do we make sure that that number is not thumb-sucked, but is actually justified? We had asked hyphen to give us a skills, a metrics to show that where these jobs are going to be slotted in and what are the phases in terms of employment, which they have already started. They have an established office in Windhoek, and we are able to tick, okay, you said you are going to employ an office administrator, you are going to employ a project developer, and these are skills in Namibia. In terms of procurement, they, what is this, I'm forgetting, the EIA. They cannot bring somebody from UK or from Germany to come and do the EIA. We have to make sure that they take a Namibian company that will be able to do, because we have the skills. And we make sure that that happens in terms of holding them accountable to what they have said, because we have set up committees that are able to follow up on that. I don't know if it gives you a bit of comfort to your question. And they have indicated yes, 30% towards local SMEs, and out of that, 90% should actually be youth participation. So we will hold them to account also in terms of our negotiation, in terms of implementation, because it's a stage gate. We will not be able to do this if you are unable to fulfill what you said you have fulfilled. Thought I want to touch on the IPP.
Yes.
My mic, thanks. Before Pina speaks, I wanted to ask you, Pina, in terms of what the gentleman at the front said here around deregulation and we know that there's a number of changes actually coming down for the ECB. And that kind of phase 2 market deregulation is also on its way. Maybe quickly just talk about that and what it'll mean, and then please conclude by adding your 2 cents to what Francis said. Thank you.
Okay. Maybe let me start with the recent one. The one on the intention. Regulators' job sometimes can be very easy. So if France, then the intention is that there must be local content and it must be a certain amount of EPC that must do the job. What we do is that we just put it in the license and it becomes a condition, and it is easier for such things as enforcement. Because as soon as it is then an intention by government that we must use a certain amount of local content and so forth, and then we put it in the license. That's why I'm saying that on the electricity side, when we started with the refit, we said we wanted local participation minimum 30%, and that is a condition. Of course, there has been some challenges, but in terms of what the intention was, that there must be ownership. So it is, as long as we are given that directive that this is what the government wants and this is a policy, then it's easier to put in the tools and instruments that we have, such as license condition or even regulations. With regard to the modified single buyer, at the end of the day, what we are saying is that electricity is a homogeneous product that can be traded. It's coming from a generator and then goes to a consumer. So in between, there should be an infrastructure that should then convey these electrons. So that's why NamPower then and some of the other utilities probably are focusing in making sure that their transmission and distribution networks are actually enhanced to enable that trading. So when we are in phase, which is phase 1B, we are allowing a 30% cap in terms of what customer can buy from an IPP. Why the 30%? Is to ensure that at least the assets that NamPower has are not stranded at the end of the day. So somebody will say, why can I not buy 100% from an IPP? I think we need to take steps so that we can also test the market. But ideally, what we are saying is that if you have taken up your 30% and you have shown to us that you can do the 30%, we will be able then to increase it if you want. But what we want to do is that we do not want to have stranded contracts that we are currently importing. We are having IPPs that we have contracted maybe 5 years ago. So that the idea is that we do not want to have those stranded. As soon as we are then, those contracts of imports are being unwound, so coming to an end, then we can then increase the capacity in terms of the threshold, so that we can then do. The government at the moment is saying we want, as soon as we reach 80% self-sufficiency, we will then be allowing imports so that those contestable customers can then also then import electricity. But at the moment we are net importer, we need to go to a certain level before we then turn it around and then allow imports. But the imports as it is, at the moment is only allowed to the national utility, which is a supplier of last resort.
Understood. So let me take questions from the floor. There, so you, and the lady there as well.
Hi, I'm Mlingani Matiwane from Umbani Energy Investments. I'd like to first begin by thanking the ECB and NamPower. The process of applying for the export license and getting letters of support and so on to join SAP has actually been very, 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 very easy, and I'm quite pleased to say that that process has matured from what it was initially. But my question is that there seems to be a bit of a confusion or disjoint between communication between NamPower and the regional energy distributors, especially those that are looking for embedded generation. Because, I mean, my fellow from Protecton is here. We have a quote from Protecton to do grid upgrades for Cinered. So now the question then becomes, is that something that should be sitting with the IPP, or is that something that should be sitting with the transmission, with the transmitter? And further to that, if we leave it with the transmitter, then we introduce execution risk to the project, because then at what point will they execute on doing such upgrades, given the project life cycle that we have? And then the last maybe question is, some of these PPAs that are signed with the regional energy distributors are 2, 5, 6 years old. And it ends up being a situation where the PPA kind of, there are no set boundaries on when the execution timelines are set out in those PPAs. So it also introduces a bit of execution risk again, with respect to execution in that regard, which is why now we're mostly looking to go to Namibia to build projects for SAP, when Namibia has a problem of non-endogenization of generation capacity. So those are the two matters that I'd like to raise.
Pinas? Maybe let's start with you and then, or let's start with Kandali, perhaps. Thank you. Kandali?
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Keith Tabo. I'm a business industrialist, and I've observed over years the lack of Africans in themselves. One, there's money in this country, South Africa, from PIC, from IDC, and also IDC. I've done big projects here for Africa, where is Nigeria and Kenya, in my factory. And I happened to invite over 12 ministers, I think 2012, from Japan, and had a meeting with them in the embassy and took them through our factories in South Africa. They said these are the best factories because of IP stealing in China, they intend coming to South Africa to invest. The issue of skills transfer and SME participation and real SME participation, not this fronting because of I think Namibia must take South Africa as a case study in terms of fronting and all that. We need to skill these kids. We need to give them the real skills to manufacture, to repair, to install, to service. We've got component manufacturers at all. I've hosted that president from component manufacturers in this country. I've worked this guy with in Shenzhen. I brought them. I said, I don't want the Chinese in this factory. We'll get local youth, manual insertion. They said, automatic SMT license, no, manual insertion. Those ladies, without metric, they did wonders. They're producing better than the Chinese in Shenzhen. So I'm saying until you Africans begin to trust yourself, believe yourself, you don't invest in yourself with the resources of the SADC region. And African free trade is something we can talk about. But for you to start, when you're looking for solution, you start running to Europe, running to Asia, I think you're missing a point. It will continue to produce a futureless generations. I can talk of so many issues, even if you operate. I think I met your ministers about 6 years ago on digital migration. I've consulted when the ITU under United Nations said we must take a uniform standard of migration. We are all fragmented. Botswana went with Japanese standard, Mozambique with Japanese standard, South Africa went with DVP, which is a European standard. We don't even have standard when the Japanese wanted to share with other standards so that we can have a middleware that we can work on issue of free trade. You can't even do anything in terms of international market penetration. So I'm saying, I know there's a lot of companies from France who happen to come to Africa, private politicians, make wrong policy decisions that impact on the future of these kids, and it pains us. Because I was also trying to be bribed, but I refused because of conscience. So I think you must begin to look at yourself as leaders, as officials, in your heart. Don't allow a little crumbs of bribe to take a wrong decision that's going to affect the future generations of Africans. I think I've seen it. It's horrendous with all the businesses. So I think you as a small country, I've been to your country, there's so much potential. You can still make it a manufacturing hub of SADC if you wish. But if you are going to be bringing Chinese that, I don't think we are getting anywhere. I will be honest with you. To me, Chinese, I said, I don't want, and even Huawei in Ethiopia, I was there in Addis, they were fired because they bribed, but they were brought back. So there are so many things that you must begin to look at yourself. Decisions you take. There's money in PIC. Why go to Europe? There's money in IDC. Why didn't you go to your neighbor? You are talking about SADC, collaboration, partnerships. Where to from here? Thank you.
Thank you. Some wise words there. So maybe if we can, before we take another question, let's answer the first one. Kandali, I think let's start with you and then to Pinas.
Thank you, Francois. Thank you for the question. The process is, as you have alluded to, the process is clear. That is to register as a contestable customer or as an eligible seller in the MSB framework. So it is so clear that we have on our different websites or respective websites, put up how that process or the process that should actually be followed. So, which you do not have a problem with it, but it only when it comes to transmission as to where you need to connect. It depends on what voltage level you actually want to connect. So if that voltage level is within the domain of the, let's say, of the red, as an example, you have to drive that process from the red side. Obviously, in consultation with NamPower on the transmission side, because obviously we have to know and we have to coordinate as NamPower what is connected where and how much is connected where. So, and with regard to the execution timelines, in terms, if you enter a power purchase agreement with a red, as an example, the onus is on the off-taker, in this instance being the red, to basically make sure that their power purchase agreement between themselves and the IPP is watertight, because it cannot have, they shouldn't actually wait perpetually for the IPP to implement or to commission the project. So there has to be timeline set. Yes, we were novice in this industry. So at the beginning, obviously, the first power purchase agreements that we had, although they were tested through the financiers, the regulator, and by the utility, but they keep improving. And also, after you have negotiated or concluded the power purchase agreement with the red, then it has to go through ECB for regulatory oversight, and that is basically to take care some of those aspects that that you might have a concern on, especially on the timeline and the execution, and the increases and on the base tariff and how the tariff increases over time, and the duration of the PPA. Just so that it is the power purchase agreement, it has to be tested in the market. It has to be a document that should actually be bankable, because this is what you will use as an IPP to basically go and market your project and solicit funds to basically execute and commission your project.
Thanks, Kandale. Pinas, did you want to add something to that, or you good?
I think I'm good.
So I had a hand, I think this gentleman here, Catherine. Oh, you've got the mic. Great.
Okay, good morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you to NIPDP and to the panelists for a really fruitful discussion. So I have, my name is Grant Miller. I'm representing a project developer called Zero, working on green hydrogen and renewables in sub-Saharan Africa as well as North Africa and the USA. So I'll try and keep my questions succinct. I have two questions to the panelists this morning. The first is, if I have a look at your board this morning, it says Namibia becoming the sustainable energy hub of Africa. Now, in my mind, to be able to do that, we need to really have good connections through to the neighboring countries. And as we sit here today, we know that the Northern Cape is fully congested, and to wheel power through the Northern Cape is going to be tricky. So my question to the panelists this morning is there a way that we would be able to alleviate that congestion, given that the ambition of Namibia is to become a net energy exporter, given our good renewable resources? Is that a place that private sector can also play in? That would be a part B to that question. And then a further question that I'd like to ask, and I hope I'm not overstepping on this one, but forgive me if I am. In 2018, there was a ministerial determination for the 220 megawatt projects that was announced. That is now 5 years ago. So the question is, I would like to just get a sense from the panelists as to, is there a timeline that we can expect the next ministerial determination to be announced? Is there some oversight that you can give to us as investors in the country? Because that certainly does provide a good overview on what's coming and allows investors certainly to prepare both financially and technically, and get our ducks in a row to be able to bid into these projects. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Thank you, sir. Carlo, no, Kandale, Pinas?
No, thank you, Grant. I will start with the ministerial determination. The ministerial determination, normally it is intended for the national capacity. So what happened is that when the market is opened, the 30% that is earmarked for the private and bilateral transactions, that is not part of the ministerial transaction. That is where, as investors or as developers, you can also then play in that space and participate in that space without waiting for the government actually to call for a tender. Because what we are saying is that when is the next tender coming out? So when we are doing tendering for the nation, which is done through a ministerial determination, we use the National Integrated Resource Plan, which then says or give us an indication as to how much capacity do we need when. So the current National Integrated Resource Plan has been revised. The minister will probably in the next month launch the new updated National Integrated Resource Plan. And at the same time, then we are expecting the minister to also announce the new rollout of new projects that are intended to be done in the next 5 years. So that is at the national level. But what we do not want is that for you to wait. You can approach the mines, you can approach the REDs, so that you can do projects as you wish. With regard to the grid connection, it is a very good question in terms of grid connection, and if private sector can also participate. I'm sure private sector can participate. Z is also here from SAP. There are those discussions, how do we then make sure that cross-border transmission lines are actually commercialized. We have, for instance, Zabona, that is Zimbabwe, Zambia, Botswana, and Namibia, where on the Namibian side, most of the network is complete, but it's on the other countries. But SAP is, I think, Kandani also mentioned it, how do we then get those projects commercialized so that it can connect all the other countries? We have a project called Angola, Namibia, where we are intending on connecting the northern side of Namibia to Angola so that we can then trade electricity much more easier. But we also have local transmission constraints. If you remember when we're speaking of Hyphen is the Southern Development Corridor. It's going to develop about 5,000 megawatts. The intention is also to connect to the grid so that they can also then trade electricity on the grid. So there is a gap there in terms of how do we connect those facilities to the existing network. So our thinking is that the Namibian customer cannot afford to upgrade that network at the moment. Not only does that corridor allows for green hydrogen, but also for gas, natural gas also. So our thinking is that if there's somebody who can give us perhaps a proposal, but this is something that we're working on so that we can also have independent transmission operators operating in that. We are not limited to only one transmission license. We can give another transmission license if necessary.
Pinas, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, one final question, please.
Good morning everyone. My name is Leo Williams from Photon Energy. We're an IPP from the Czech Republic. We have an interesting CSP technology that we would like to obviously bring to Namibia because it's one of the hubs for CSP as well, not just green hydrogen. I love everything I've been hearing this morning regarding local content. We have put a lot of things in place to tick those boxes, and as well as the gentleman mentioned in terms of EPC from local suppliers. I think just a question regarding financing projects into the merchant model, and I think Mr. Matato, you focused a bit on that as well as Rand Merchant Bank. How do we prepare our project and actually finance it in the merchant model? Has banks already revised this model? Has it worked in Namibia? Has it worked in the region in South Africa? In Europe, where we are currently developing projects, merchant is a new form or model. Although the markets have been selling on merchant basis for quite some time, but PPAs has always been the main source of these projects. But merchant projects, are they starting to be financed within Africa? Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Leo. Fabian?
Yeah, I could have a stab at it. Yeah, I think the view really is, I mean, if you look at the Namibian context, started with the refit program, went to MSB, and as a bank, we naturally just follow the trajectory. As and when the market changes, we accordingly would adapt. The latest, obviously, sort of model that we working with now is the MSB, and actually, as recent as I think is last year, and I do see one of our partners sitting in the audience, we didn't transact in that, but actually it is our client, and one of our partners actually funded sort of that IPP project. So the view we take here is, and I think it's all banks, they will remain with what the market does. But the reality is, you know, the risk frameworks within different banks varies. But what we aim to do within Namibia is to ensure that if for a commercial bank that appetite is not what we want to take on, we will ensure that either through strategic partners, in this instance it could be the Environmental Fund, we do have the Development Bank of Namibia, through those partnerships, it's almost like we have to ensure that there is a solution. You can't simply walk away, and I think gone are the days where you simply say, well, you know, not for me, and then you turn away. So be it now the merchant model, there's lots of talk around SAPP. Do you have the appetite? Do you not? The point is, if we don't take on a particular, and we do look at it on a project basis, various matrices, you know, and SAP people is a classic one. But the point is, I think I would almost give you the comfort that you shouldn't be concerned that there will not be a Namibian solution. I think we do have enough players in the industry that between the various sort of types of financiers, and there is enough collaboration happening. So I think feel free to reach out, and we will work towards something.
Unfortunately, this is the end of the session. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon or this morning. There is what? No, unfortunately, we need to vacate the room, and that's part of the pressures of conferences like this. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for the insightful questions. Thank you to the panel for being here. And like I said earlier, if you have some burning questions, please feel free to engage with them. We'll be hanging around for a little while afterwards. If you want to speak about investing in Namibia in particular, myself, Catherine, and one or two of our other colleagues, we are around. Please feel free to touch base with us. Thank you for being here. Good morning.